You've been told to go off gluten to help with your chronic illness, but just going off and being on a gluten free diet may not help you. What is more important is what comes after. My name is Anindita, and I am a functional medicine certified health coach and a practitioner. And I help women with undiagnosed autoimmune diseases ease their pain using a body guided approach by tuning into their body's wisdom. And today I'm going to talk a bit about why gluten is such a big problem, why we need, we need not look at gluten-free diet as something which is a fad. Actually, there is a strong science supporting why we need to stay off gluten. But more importantly, I'm going to touch upon a few ways that you can actually stay off gluten because I find that just having this knowledge of what gluten is about and how to go off it is merely not enough. We need to also have some tools to understand how to stay off gluten, right? What are some of the things that makes it sustainable? And that's, I think, is the key here. So I'm going to touch upon that. So make sure that you stay till the end. If you have any questions, make sure that you drop it in the comments below, and I'll be answering as I go along. And of course, if you are interested in taking care of your mental health, I actually have a free workshop coming up. It's called Taking Care of Your Mental Health When You're Dealing with an Undiagnosed Autoimmune Disease. The link is in the bio here. I'm going to be sharing the link in the post. You can check that out and sign up for that. It's going to be on the 30th of May later this month. So let's just get going about what is a gluten-free diet. What is this all about? Is it a fad, or does it actually have some basis to it? See, at the end of the day, diet is a four-letter word, right? That's all it is. And we have all kinds of diets. We have keto, we have paleo. It's actually quite confusing for for the layman, right? Which one should I be following? What should I be doing? And why should I be doing it at all? But it's what we need to start with is the fact that we need to be mindful about what we are eating no matter what diet you're following, right? It's not so much about the diet as it is to understand what's going on and why you need to support and how you need to support your body's healing, and becoming mindful about your daily choices, about the foods that you're putting in your body every single day. This is where it starts, and this is what makes any diet that you're on, sustainable, right? So it's your choices are as important as the foods that you're choosing or not, or choosing not either to have or not to have, right? So that's where I would start. So starting with understanding how much attention are you actually paying to the foods that you're consuming, right? Are you somebody who's chomping mindlessly through a meal, or are you actually paying attention to how you're feeling inside your body after you have had that food or that particular meal? Do you have more energy levels? Do you have less energy levels? Do you notice any connection between your pain and the food that you just ate? Your pain levels might go up, might go down, all kinds of things. There are all kinds of ways that your body is signaling you and telling you whether a particular food is going to suit you or not, or is suiting you or not, right? And this goes beyond lab testing. Lab testing is brilliant. It gives us a lot of data, but it is just one piece of the puzzle. Understanding how your body is reacting to your two foods is what makes this sustainable, and that's actually your best barometer, right? Rather than focusing only on external validation and external data, right? But let's first step into why gluten is a problem. I think we are all hearing about gluten as an issue, but there is a lot of confusion about why is it a problem in the first place, especially when we think that we've been eating it forever, right? I mean, our at least 3 4 generations back, we certainly know has been eating wheat. So let's just step back up a moment and understand what's really going on here. So gluten is a composite of different proteins. The two most common ones are gliadin and glutenin. Okay, there are many other proteins, and there are certain tests, which functional medicine testing, which is available, which tells you whether your body is producing antibodies to any of these proteins or not. Just FYI, but it's When your body is not able to tolerate gluten, when it thinks that gluten is a threat, your body produces antibody towards it. So one of the tests that we do is anti-gliadin antibodies. So gluten is a composite of different proteins, and it is found in different grains, right? The one that we know or hear most about obviously is wheat, but it's also found in grains like rye, barley, and all kinds of wheat for that matter. No matter what, what kind of hybrid wheat that we know about now, all grains have gluten. The amount of gluten actually keeps changing. And then of course we have other grains, but it's also found, we know, in smaller traces in rice, etc., right? But it's mainly the wheat, rye, barley that we focus on. Oats actually gets cross contaminated for most times, so oats can be a problem. It depends on person to person, but that's what it is. And the problem is, one of the problems is that there is more gluten than ever before in our foods, and there are multiple reasons for it. I'll give you an example. Simple things like baking powder can have wheat in it. We have something called hing in India. I think it's a spice, right? Asafoetida. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing it correctly. That has wheat in it. Soy sauce has wheat in it. Lot of French fries have wheat in it. Lot of processed foods. Obviously, I'm talking about packaged foods have wheat in the most unlikely places, right? As I mentioned, soy sauce. And there's so many. If you actually take a packaged food and you start looking at the ingredients, you will often find wheat flour or white flour. It can be in different names, but you will find that wheat is a part of it. So when we put all of the breads that we are consuming, the flat breads or the rotis as we call it, and the wheats in all the processed foods that we are consuming today, there's a huge amount of gluten that is coming in, which was not what our ancestors or our parents or grandparents or great grandparents were having, right? Typically, they were having whole unprocessed foods, and at the most, they used to have flatbreads. There were no breads or baked breads in India, at least. Or if there were, if it was the norm in some other country, even then the gluten amount and the number of breads that we have been consuming has actually spiked. So the first thing is that we are consuming much more gluten than ever before, right? Our bodies have not evolved to deal with so much of gluten. The second is that this wheat has been modified. So the kind of wheat that we are consuming today is not what our body has evolved to deal with. What our grandparents, great grandparents were having. So that there is a modification there, and that is and can cause immune reactions. So that's another problem there. And then so it can cause immune reactions in our gut. So this is different from allergies, right? So it's not that you have a wheat allergy. It is that in the gut itself, your immune system, 70% of your immune system is in your gut, and that's responding or triggering an immune response. The gluten in the wheat is triggering an immune response, right? And as I mentioned, there's a higher concentration of gluten in the grains that we are consuming today. And the other thing to understand is that agriculture is relatively new, right? It's not more than about 10,000 years. Before that, we were primarily hunters and gatherers. So we used to eat seasonal nuts, berries, seeds, and animals, not so much of plants, and certainly not as much grains, right? And we used to revolve our foods depending on seasonal availability and seasonal produce. Now, what has happened today, if you look at today, and it just happened in the last, as I mentioned, 50 to 100 years or so, which is actually not long at all, where we have suddenly, looking at huge amount of grains in our diet. It's become really grain heavy, and a huge part of the grain has now become more of wheat. So it's not that, grains. It's not that it's a bad thing per se that we have developed agriculture. I'm not sort of trying to badmouth that at all. I'm just pointing out some of the issues and why we and connecting it to some of the problems that we are facing today, because that's a whole discussion, separate discussion altogether, right? Today's topic is more about how it is affecting us, and this awareness has to be there, and then only we can know what we need to do about it. So now the seasonality of our foods actually has gone down quite a lot, right? So we need to bring that back and rotate around the different grains. That's one option. A lot of the millets, and not just focus only on the wheat. So go back to some of how we used to eat earlier. And the last part is, which is also important to understand, that gluten actually creates an immune complex, right? It's basically when your antibodies bind to the protein, which is gluten, right, in the grain, and then it forms a complex that travels around your body. And it's these immune complexes that create a problem, and your body immune system is not able to clear it. The other thing is that most of us have actually problems with our gut health issues, where our gut lining has become adversely impacted, and undigested gluten and undigested wheat particles are entering the bloodstream, which is a reason the immune system is actually responding to it, reacting to it, and producing antibodies to it, right? So most of us, and for many different reasons, whether it's stress, whether it's toxin exposure, whether it's medication, antibiotics, low vitamin D, all of these affect the integrity of our gut lining. And if your body is anyways not able to digest wheat and break it down completely, then you have these undigested gluten, undigested protein components which enter the bloodstream, and it's sort of confusing our immune system in a way, and it's choosing to respond because its job is to protect you, to keep you safe. So it feels that it's a threat, and it creates antibodies. And what happens over time is that the protein and the structure, the molecular structure in gluten looks suspiciously like the molecular structure in many of our tissues, which is when your immune system also eventually can start producing antibody towards your tissue. This happens in the case of autoimmune diseases. This is actually the genesis of autoimmune disease progression, and this is one reason why there is a huge rise in autoimmune diseases all across the world, right? Even if you don't have one today, this is important for you to understand so that you can start doing something about it. Maybe you can cut down on your consumption. Maybe you can go back to one of the older forms of wheat. Maybe you can, sort of rotate your grains accordingly. So there are many things that you can do even if you don't have an issue today. But it's my role here today is to just give you this, knowledge, create this awareness so that you can decide what is good for you. So as I mentioned, so then what happens when these immune complexes travel around your body is that it creates inflammation, because of the immune response. Then there is tissue damage. Then there is autoimmune, chronic autoimmune activation. It gets embedded in the joints. This is actually the development of rheumatoid arthritis, or even, the autoimmune form of arthritis. So these is exactly how chronic disease progresses, and specifically autoimmune disease, which comes along with the pain, because the inflammation is a big part of it. And of course, as I mentioned, this overexposure to the recently developed forms of wheat is also a big problem. So one way is to also figure out a way to go back maybe to some of the earlier ones. But having said that, if you already have an autoimmune disease, whether you have an official diagnosis or not, what I mean by that is whether you have been officially diagnosed with a autoimmune disease or not, if you're still waiting to know which one you have, and or if you already have a confirmed diagnosis, maybe you have Hashimoto's, maybe you have Graves, maybe you have lupus, any multiple sclerosis, it doesn't really matter. Gluten is one of the big issues there. The first thing that we make changes in the diet is to take off gluten, and this has to do with your gut health, because the integrity of the gut lining is at stake, and is one of the three main things that contributes to chronic autoimmune activation. So we know that if anybody is on this autoimmune spectrum, they have a problem with their, or they have impaired gut lining, which means that they are prone to these immune complexes, getting into the bloodstream. And if we do not stop the, so we can do a lot of things downstream, but if you're not able to go upstream and stop the sort of, the movement of this undigested gluten or these complexes into the bloodstream in the first place, this autoimmune activation is not going to stop. Which is why the first thing that we do, first thing that I do with my clients when they come and start working with me, is to take off gluten from their diet. It is the first thing, but it's not the last, right? This is where we start. It's like saying that there is a leak a gas leak in a house, and there is as a result there is a fire that is raging in the house, and we call the fire engine, and they are basically trying to put out the fire, and they have the fire extinguishers, and they're trying to put out the fire with the fire extinguisher, but at the same time they know that they need to switch off the source of the leak. They need to plug that leak so that you don't have further issues down the line, because you can have the best extinguishers, but if you're not able to plug the leak, then you're not actually solving the problem, right? So that's exactly how this works. And I've talked about gut health. So gut health is a big, has a big role to play in any chronic disease activation, particularly in the case of autoimmune diseases. Again, it does not matter where you already have an official diagnosis or not. You still have to consider that your gut health has to be a key priority area for you to work on, right? And of course, there are different tests which will confirm that, but I usually avoid doing tests just for the sake of doing tests, because we know this. There's enough research, and I would rather get going and start laying the foundations of making sure that we start reducing, calming down the immune response. That itself helps to reduce the pain levels. That itself helps to increase energy levels. Right? These are the two main things that most people with autoimmune conditions deal with: constant pain and severe exhaustion, right? So reducing, so as I said, gluten is not the only step, it's the first step, and then the other things follow after that, right? So what are some of the ways? So if you're convinced, if you understand why you need to look at gluten and maybe taking off gluten from your diet, then the next question would be that how do I stay off it? How do I ensure that this is something that I make a part of my life? How do I make it a habit, right? Because you can be off gluten for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then if you come back to it and start consuming it again, you will not see the results, right? Or you will see the results for a bit. Understand that the antibodies that your body is producing against gluten or any such food, this is one type of antibodies called IgG antibodies. We do a test for it in India. We call it food intolerance test. And these antibodies typically, once they are produced, they live for about 21 days, which is about 3 weeks, 3 odd weeks. So that's the reason that the minimum amount of time that you have to take off any of these foods which are causing a problem for your immune system is at least a month, at least, right, to see a difference. And of course, if you have a raging flare up, or if you have a raging disease which is on right now, and you want to sort of lessen your pain, you want to deal with your severe exhaustion and all the other symptoms, of course, then it really helps to be off gluten for 6 months to a year, maybe more. It depends. It depends on how severe the damage is. It depends on how long this autoimmune disease progression or this chronic disease progression has been going on. There is no one right number for everybody, but typically these diseases progress over years, if not decades, right? It takes a lot of time to get a diagnosis for an autoimmune disease. So the disease actually progression started several years ago, if not decades ago, and the tissue damage ultimately accumulates, then it leads to organ damage and eventually organ dysfunction, which is when you get a diagnosis. So if that has been going on for such a long time, it will take time for the gut to heal, for things to for you to go and get into remission, right, to reverse your symptoms, which is why it becomes a bit tricky to sustain these changes, to stay off gluten even once you're off it. And it's not just gluten. Today I'm focusing on gluten because I find that that's one question that keeps coming up. Do I need to stay off? How do I need to stay off? So that's what I'm answering today, but it can be for any other changes that you will need to make, right? But let's just focus on gluten for now. So there are three things that I want you to sort of look at. There are three ways that I'm going to share with you now that you can do this on a sustainable basis. The first one I've already touched upon. It's mindful eating, paying attention to what you're eating and how you're eating, right? It's not about only the which foods you're having or only focusing on healthy foods. Equally important is to start paying attention to paying attention, right? Not being distracted while you're eating. It ensures optimal digestion. It ensures strong stomach acid production, digestive enzyme secretion, because your body, it gets the message that it's time to digest the food. There are two nervous system modes. One is the fight or flight, which, as the name suggests, is primarily to, for survival, and it's really necessary for survival. But we honestly cannot digest and break down and absorb the food in that mode, or do any repair work or any healing of any kind, right? So that's fight or flight. And the other one is rest and digest. And again, as the name suggests, it's about repair work, it's about healing from a disease, it's about digesting your food, getting the food, getting the right nutrients. You cannot be in both the modes at the same time. So if you're in constantly in the survival mode, the fight or flight mode, then you are not digesting your food. And by not paying attention to your meals, by being distracted, by being on the phone, by watching the news, by having an argument, anything that puts your body in fight or flight mode, whether you realize it or not, is going to affect your digestion, and in turn is going to affect your nutrient intake, nutrient absorption, and of course your gut and everything else, your energy, your pain, everything, right? So the first step I would, to make it sustainable, because when you start paying attention, you realize how much which food is helping you. It becomes much easier to sustain those changes. So the first thing is mindful eating, and this is something that I teach my clients in my program from day one. Like, we actually do an exercise with a raisin, with a piece of chocolate. It makes it fun, it makes it interesting, and it, more importantly, it demonstrates the power of actually paying attention to your food. It makes it enjoyable, right? No matter what you are eating. The second thing is to start recording your food, your mood and your energy, and maybe even your pain levels, right? I mean, so we call it the food mood journal, but it can also be called, you can call it whatever you like, right? It's more of a food journal. So you can do it for a month. You don't have to do it forever. Maybe for 30 days, you keep a journal of what foods you're consuming, the main ingredients, of course. You don't need to write down each and every spice or herbs, but the main foods that we know might be an issue. So maybe it's, the vegetables, the main vegetables, the main fruits, the main ingredients, right? Dairy, and each meal, and do it for minimum of 2 weeks. 30 days is a good time frame, and then you start seeing a pattern. And again, it depends on how deep you want to go into it. And this is again, I show some of my clients to do. Not everybody needs to do this. Some of them are pretty tuned in, but some people need to see the impact of food on their health, and it really helps to write it down and notice a pattern. So what you can start writing down is how, so you had a food, and then you later on, if you could notice any changes in your mood. So it's your mood, you can put down your energy, and you can put down your pain, right? You can put down all three, whatever you want to track, because once you start tracking it, you can actually see a pattern, and then if you see any difference, you can actually tweak your diet accordingly. And this awareness is always the first step, right? And when you become aware of how exactly your food is affecting you, you will find it much easier to sustain, to stay off those foods which are causing you pain, which are causing you discomfort, suffering, right? It's much easier to stay off them for as long as your body needs you to, right? This is what I call a body guided approach. This is the approach that I use in my program, and I believe it's the most effective way to deal with, especially an undiagnosed autoimmune disease, where you're still waiting for an answer, where you're still waiting for a diagnosis, and in the meantime you're getting sicker and sicker. However, this approach really does not require you to wait for any external test or external validation, which is the beauty of this. Your body is your guide, right? So the first thing that I mentioned was mindful eating. The second is a food mood or a food energy, pain, whatever you want to sort of track journal. And the third is something that I do with my clients. It's again a very powerful exercise. It's using your character strengths. First, knowing your character strengths, and then using them to again help you sustain these changes. These are hard to make, and even more hard to sustain over the long period of time, which is necessary if you want to really heal from your autoimmune condition or any chronic illness that you might be having. And we all have 24 character strengths. There is a lot of huge body of research. Social scientists have been doing this for a while. There is a free survey which I make my clients do actually, and you can do it too. It's VIA It's a character strength survey. It's, I think, called VIA. Forgetting the link. I'll see if I can share the link here. And you, all of us, each one of us across the world, no matter where we live, with society, with strata, we all have 24 character strengths. And we know this intuitively, right? If I ask you what are your top strengths, you will be able to like tell me, because you might see creativity as your top strength, maybe bravery is your top strength, and because you are, you are never afraid to speak up your mind, maybe honesty is your top strength. You really like being honest about things. So it depends. I mean, gratitude is my top strength actually, so I can find things to be grateful for in the most unlikely of situations. So you will know what your top strengths are. But when you actually see that strengths in order of how you are using them, and they answer the question that who you are at the core and who you want to be, and they can evolve over time. But you will find the top 5 to 7 strengths, which are your signature strengths, they don't really change. They define who you are. And when you can actually use these strengths more intentionally, that's the whole purpose of doing this. You can actually change your life because you can change your habits, you can change your thinking, and they help you to deal with challenges, that help you to. So let's just see how it ties into this, what I've been talking about today, which is going off gluten and staying off gluten. So I shared the story of my daughter. My daughter had to go off gluten because we realized that she was gluten intolerant. It came up in one of the tests, but I knew because she had a form of immune dysregulation which led to eczema that most likely gluten was a problem, and we figured that out later. But she was only 8 years old and she was struggling to stay off, and she had, and her eczema flared up. So we did this exercise together, and her top strengths, if I can remember correctly, so I asked her this question, that which are the 2 or 3 strengths that you have, and we had the sheet in front of us that you would like to use to help you stay off gluten. So it was her answer, because that has to come from that person, right? It's not me who has to supply you with this answer. And she said love. And of course, my next question was, how do you think love will help you? And her answer was that love for my own body, for myself, will help me to stay off gluten because I know it doesn't suit my body. What is the another strength that you can use? And her answer was gratitude. And again, the same question: how would gratitude help you as a strength? And her answer was that gratitude, being grateful for the foods that I can actually have, being grateful for the things that I can do, because if my eczema is under control, then I can do so much more rather than when I'm constantly in pain. And the third thing that she picked up was forgiveness. And again, her answer was that forgiveness would be if she made a mistake, and if she had, because she, for whatever the reason she saw her friends having, then at least she could forgive herself for making that mistake, and making sure that again, she went back to not having it, right? And that's the exercise that we had done in 2015. And since then, she's been off gluten. She doesn't even crave for it. We get it in the house because I have other family members, but we rarely have wheat in the house. When we travel, when we go outside, we try and avoid, but we do have it sometimes. The rest of us are not 100% off. But at home, we are more or less about 90% or so, and she's 100% off, and she's never looked back. And the same goes with my clients. I gave you this example because it is really close to my heart, but it's the same thing with my clients. So no matter what changes they're trying to make, and even if you were struggling with this particular change, knowing your strengths and being able to use them intentionally would help you to reach that, right? So this is what I had to share with you today. So I wanted to help you understand why is gluten such a problem today, the kind of wheat that we are having, the way our body responds to it, how our poor gut health helps, not helps actually, but sort of contributes to forming immune complexes, which then trigger and which then create inflammation all around the body, and how it ties into autoimmune disease, whether you have been diagnosed or not, is immaterial, or whether you have celiac disease or many other chronic diseases. And a lot of us have gluten intolerance, even if we may not have celiac disease per se. And So, and then of course there are three ways that I shared with you that you can actually stay off gluten, right? It's not about just doing it for a while. It's not a fad diet. It's not about a month. It might be for the rest of your life. It is certainly for at least 6 months to a year, if not more, right? That's how long it takes to undo the damage. And at the end of it, most of my clients find that when they got off and when they felt so much better, they made the other changes, their suffering has gone down so considerably that they got their life back, that they don't want to ever go back to that situation, right? That's the beauty. So it is lifelong in so many ways, and that's exactly what I teach my clients inside the program. And of course, stress associated with this is something is again very real. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a free workshop coming up. It's called Taking Care of Your Mental Health When You're Dealing with an Undiagnosed Autoimmune Disease. And it's happening, taking place on the 30th of May. The link is in the bio. I'll be sharing it in the post. Make sure that you check it out and sign up for that. If you have any questions, if you're watching it on replay, make sure that you're dropping your questions and I'll make sure to answer that.